Welcome to Nightbound Whispers, where every state hides a secret, and every road has a story buried in the dark. Tonight, we're sharing 3 true horror stories from abandoned ranch houses in West Texas, real experiences from people who walked inside places that should have been empty, and found they weren't. The ranch house that never locked. West Texas has a way of making distance feel unreal. You can drive for an hour and still feel like you haven't moved. That's what drew me out there in the first place. I wasn't looking for anything paranormal. I was looking for quiet. I had just left a job in Midland, burned out and angry, and a friend told me about an old cattle ranch outside of Marathon that was sitting empty. The owner lived out of state and paid a local guy to check on the fences once a month. He needed someone to stay on the property for a few weeks and make sure nobody stripped the place for scrap. The pay wasn't great, but it included a place to stay. An old ranch house. When I first saw it, it didn't look haunted. It looked tired. 1-story limestone structure, porch sagging in the middle, roof patched in places where hail had chewed it up over the years. Mesquite trees grew too close to the walls. The land around it was wide open, miles of scrub and low hills, no neighbors in sight. Cell service dropped the moment I turned off the highway. The key I'd been given worked, but I noticed right away that the lock didn't actually catch unless you turned it just right. The door would close, but it never felt sealed. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old wood. Furniture was still there. A dining table. 2 chairs. A couch with the springs showing. Someone had left in a hurry or just stopped caring. The electricity worked, but only in half the rooms. The bedroom at the back had no power, so I set up in the front room near the kitchen. That first night was quiet in a way that felt almost artificial. No coyotes. No wind. No insects. Just nothing. I woke up sometime after midnight with the sensation that someone was standing in the room with me. Not a sound, not movement, just that deep, instinctive awareness. My eyes opened, and the room looked the same as when I went to sleep. Moonlight through the windows. Furniture exactly where it should be. I lay there for a long time, listening. Eventually, I told myself it was just nerves. The second night, I heard the door. Not opening. Closing. It was slow, careful. Wood against wood. The sound a door makes when someone eases it shut instead of letting it swing. I sat straight up in bed. The porch light was still on, shining through the window, but the front door was now fully closed. I knew for a fact I hadn't shut it. I kept it cracked because the latch didn't work right. I checked the house. Every room. Every window. Nothing disturbed. No footprints outside. The ground was dry and dusty, and it would have shown tracks easily. I convinced myself I must have closed the door without thinking. The third night, I tested it. I left the door wide open before going to bed. Propped it with a chair so it couldn't swing shut on its own. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow. Heavy. Like boots dragging slightly. I froze. The steps reached the door. Stopped. Then I heard the chair scrape across the floor. The door closed. When I jumped up and turned on the lights, the chair was against the wall, neatly placed like someone had moved it out of the way. The door was shut, but the lock still hadn't caught. I opened it and stepped outside, heart pounding. Nothing. No one. Just open land and stars. The next morning, I noticed something I'd missed before. On the inside of the door frame, deep into the wood, were old scratch marks. Long, vertical gouges, worn smooth with age. Someone, or something, had clawed at that door for years. That night, I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard breathing. Not in the room. In the hallway leading to the dark back bedroom. Slow, deliberate breaths. Like someone standing still, listening. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a long time, the sound drifted closer. Stopped just outside the doorway. Then it whispered my name. I left the ranch at sunrise and never went back. The owner later told me, casually, that the last caretaker didn't last long either. When I asked why, he didn't answer. He just said the house had never liked being empty. The cattle brand that moved. My uncle worked ranch land his whole life. When he passed, my cousins and I were left to sort through an abandoned property near Fort Stockton that had been in the family for decades. The ranch house sat alone at the end of a dirt road that barely existed anymore. No power. No running water. The place had been empty since the late 90s after a bad drought forced the cattle operation to shut down. We planned to spend one night there. Just long enough to catalog what was left. The house was small but solid. Thick walls. Iron hardware. The kind of place built to survive heat and time. In the main room, burned into the wooden support beam, was an old cattle brand. My uncle's father's mark. It was faded but still visible. We joked about it, took pictures, and moved on. That night, we slept on the floor in sleeping bags. Around midnight, one of my cousins woke me up and asked if I was messing with the lights. I told him there were no lights. He said he'd seen something glowing in the main room. We checked. Nothing. Later, I woke up on my own. The house was cold in a way that didn't match the season. My breath fogged in front of me. I looked toward the main room and saw a faint orange glow. Not bright. Just enough to see the outline of the beam. The brand was glowing. Not burning. Not hot. Just lit from within, like embers buried deep in the wood. I stared at it, unable to move. The glow pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Then I smelled it. Not smoke. Blood. Metallic and thick. Behind me, something shifted. I felt pressure near my feet, like a weight settling down. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The glow intensified, and I heard cattle lowing outside. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Hooves pounding the ground. But there were no cattle on that land. Not anymore. The brand on the beam began to change. The lines twisted, bending into shapes that didn't match the original mark. New symbols formed over the old ones, layered and wrong. My cousin screamed. I broke free and turned just in time to see a shadow pull itself up from the floor, tall and wide, shaped like a man but moving like an animal. We ran. Outside, the land was empty and silent again. No cattle. No tracks. When we went back inside at sunrise, the brand was normal. Faded. Dead wood. We sold the property within a month. I later learned that before my family owned it, the land had been used as a holding area during forced cattle drives in the early 1900s. Thousands of animals died there. And some of the men with them never left either. The ranch house that answered back. I wasn't trespassing when I found the ranch house, at least not intentionally. I was working with a small historical documentation group that cataloged abandoned structures across rural Texas, mostly so their existence wouldn't disappear completely. Old schools, closed churches, forgotten homesteads. Most of what we found was collapsing, stripped, or already half swallowed by the land. This one was different from the moment I turned off the highway and followed the coordinates into nothingness. The dirt road faded into ruts and then into a suggestion of a path, but the GPS insisted I was still on course. There were no fences, no cattle guards, no signs of recent traffic. Just mesquite, scrub grass, and wide open sky. After nearly 40 minutes, the ranch house appeared without warning, sitting in a shallow dip like it had settled there on purpose. No barn. No pens. No windmill. Just the house. What struck me first was that it didn't look abandoned in the way most places do. The roof was intact. The windows weren't broken. The porch hadn't collapsed. There were no spray-painted names or beer cans scattered around. It looked empty, yes, but not neglected. Like something had been waiting rather than decaying. I parked a good distance away and walked the rest of the way in. The ground around the house was hard-packed dirt, almost swept clean by wind. No footprints. No animal tracks. No debris. The front door was closed but unlocked. I hesitated before opening it, that familiar instinctive pause you get when something feels slightly off but you can't justify it logically. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the air was stale but not foul. It smelled like old paper and dry wood. Dust lay on every surface, thick enough to tell me no one had been there recently, but undisturbed. No trails, no handprints. The furniture was still in place. A small table. 2 chairs. A couch pushed against the wall. In the kitchen, plates sat neatly stacked beside the sink. The radio on the counter looked like it had been placed there intentionally, not left behind. A calendar hung crooked on the wall near the hallway. October 1986. The days were marked in pencil. Some circled. Some crossed out. I didn't linger on it at the time. I started doing what I always did. Photographs first. Wide shots. Details. Structural notes. The silence inside the house was heavy, the kind that presses against your ears. No creaking wood. No wind through cracks. Even the outside world felt muted once I stepped inside, like the house absorbed sound instead of echoing it. I had just finished photographing the main room when I heard a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was soft, almost conversational, coming from down the hallway. "Hello?" I stood still, camera halfway lowered. My first thought was embarrassment. I assumed I'd missed another surveyor or maybe a local caretaker. I answered instinctively. "Hello?" The voice replied immediately. "Hello." Same tone. Same pitch. Same cadence. That stopped me cold. It didn't sound like someone responding. It sounded like someone replaying. I waited. No footsteps. No movement. I asked again, louder this time, who was there? The voice repeated my words exactly, including the hesitation I hadn't realized was there. That's when the wrongness set in. I moved slowly toward the hallway, calling out again. Each time, my words came back to me unchanged, but not delayed like an echo. The response was too precise. Too intentional. When I stopped speaking entirely, the house went dead silent. I told myself it was acoustics. Old buildings do strange things with sound. I didn't believe it, but I needed something to anchor to. I took one step back toward the front door. Behind me, the radio clicked on. Static filled the room, sharp and loud enough to make me flinch. I spun around just as a man's voice cut through the noise. Low. Distorted. Slow. It said my name. Not shouted. Not questioned. Stated. Again. And again. I hadn't told anyone where I was going that day. The location hadn't been shared publicly. The coordinates came from a notebook scanned decades earlier. There was no logical explanation for my name coming from that radio. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. The static grew heavier, layered with something underneath it, like breathing picked up by a microphone too close to a mouth. The hallway darkened, shadows thickening even though the light hadn't changed. The bedroom door at the end of the hall creaked open. I could hear breathing now without the radio. Slow. Wet. Close enough to be inside the room, but not close enough to locate. I asked, barely above a whisper, what it wanted. The voice answered without copying me this time. Stay. The word wasn't threatening. It was patient. Assured. As I moved toward the door, the house began to respond to me in ways I can't fully explain. My footsteps came back wrong, delayed and layered, as if someone else was stepping a half-second behind me. My breathing echoed out of sync. When I swallowed, the sound returned stretched, warped. It felt like the house was recording me. Learning me. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. It resisted just long enough to make my stomach drop before opening fully. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything stopped. The radio cut off. The breathing vanished. The echoes died. Outside, the wind hit me hard, like the world rushing back all at once. I didn't look back at the house until I reached my car. It stood exactly as before. Silent. Still. Empty. Later that night, back in my motel room hours away, I reviewed the photos. Most were normal. Dusty rooms. Faded furniture. Then I reached the last image. The one taken just before the radio turned on. It was a photo of the bedroom doorway. In the cracked mirror hanging on the wall, I could see the reflection of the room behind me. And standing just behind where I had been holding the camera was a shape. Human in outline. Mouth open far wider than it should have been. Listening. I never submitted that photo. I never went back. And I learned later, after digging into county records, that no owner had been listed for that land since the late 80s. The ranch house didn't belong to anyone. And I don't think it ever wanted to. That was tonight's Whisper from the Shadows. Subscribe to Nightbound Whispers. And remember, the night is never truly silent.